Hey, welcome to the 12th episode of the 9/11 Report. As usual, I'm Adam Fitzgerald, and with me today, 9/11 geopolitical researcher, author, and investigator, Leonardo Salvaggio. Leo, what's going on your side of the world?
Well, thanks for having me on, Adam. This is our 12th episode, as you mentioned. My part of the world is as crazy as yours, probably, with
Mm,
so much going on. So I think that our effort should be in keeping people informed and also, calm down things a little bit. So let's talk about history so that people are aware of what happened. And when they have to make decisions, they make it on conscious basis rather than on their emotions. That's what we're doing, probably.
Goodness gracious, I can't agree more. I've always said that in order to understand what's going on in the present or in the future, you have to go into the past. And the topic today is a very interesting one. One I was very happy that Leo brought it up the other day. Ahmad Shah Massoud was a very infamous figure and a very enigmatic figure as well. He's one of my um, more. I remember in my early days of studying to 9/11, I had to do a deep dive into the Afghan Soviet occupation, and his name is very prominent throughout. Massoud actually is a ethnic Tajik is an ethnic Tajik. He's a Sunni Muslim, and he's from the Panjshir Valley, which is um, located, if I'm correct, southern or I'm sorry, northern Afghanistan. And he went to university, and he went to the same Kabul University. He went to the same university as an individual named Burhamin Rabbani, who would later, by the way, after the Soviet occupation, would become the president of Afghanistan, I think between the years 1992 to 1996, if I'm correct. And he was a very influential figure to Massoud. And why Massoud is a prominent figure, and it began during the leadership under Muhammad Daoud Khan. Now, Daoud Khan, I wrote about him a couple of years ago, about 7 years ago, when I used to be a prolific writer on Medium. And he was an Afghan military officer who served as the prime minister of Afghanistan uh, between, I think, like 1955 to like 65 or something like that. But it was like from the mid 50s to like near the beginning of the 1960s. But it was a communist regime, and so we had an influx of Afghans, Tajiks, Pashtuns who basically suffered under this communist regime. And Ahmad Shah Massoud would later join the Rabbani Party, which was the Jamiat-e-Islami Party. And during not to bore you, but after the Soviets invaded in 1979, um, Ahmad Shah Massoud would become a leader of many different Afghan sects that fought against the Soviet occupation with the help, none other than of the Pakistan ISI. The CIA took an interest in Massoud as well as other leaders like um, Rabbani, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Abdul Rasul Sayaf, and others. But the majority of the funding between the CIA program, Operation Cyclone, went to two individuals, and they had the biggest warlord clans in the Afghan war, and that was Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and Abdul Rasul Sayaf. They were also the most influential. Now, the British MI6 was involved, the CIA was involved, the Pakistan ISI. There was millions and millions and millions of dollars pumped into this program about arming these Afghan groups against the communist regime because the United States could be seen as a direct participant. They went through non-government organizations, also known as NGOs, that would go through different companies, different charities that were based in the United States, Islamic charities, right to the funding of the Afghan clerics that were coming from Pakistan organizations through the Pakistan ISI. So it was an indirect involvement by the United States, but they were involved. This way, you didn't have World War III. Now, following the end of the occupation, this is where it became very interesting in Afghanistan. And also, this is their darkest time, Leo. The Taliban took over tried to take over the country, but they were at odds with different Afghan organizations, especially to the north. And it was one group called the Northern Alliance. And this would be led by none other than Ahmad Shah Massoud. He began having problems with Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, who was seen as a Salafist, who basically didn't like, one thing about, let me explain this way. One thing about Afghan warlords I've noticed from my studies is that they're uh, very, they're very jealous of each other. Even through the most insignificant items, they have to be the leaders, they have to be the face, they have to have the most money, they have to have the biggest army. It's their rule, it's their way of the highway, so to speak, to keep it simple. And you would have all these different warlords basically at odds with one another. And Ahmad Shah Massoud became in conflict with Gulbuddin Ekbatar, but he was friendly with Abdul Rasul Sayyaf, so Sayyaf stood away from this. But while the Taliban came in with Muhammad Mullah Omar, they saw it as we're going to cleanse Afghanistan away from communists and go back to the religious teaching of the Sunnah, and that's what they believed in. And so they brought their religious school, which, by the way, the Taliban just means religious school. And you have these madrasas in Jalalabad and in Peshawar. And Mullah Omar brought that army with him because he was so influential, and because the Pakistanis and the Afghanis got so tired of this, civil war between these Afghan groups and the Communist Party themselves under Rabbani. The Taliban grew under power, but not without help. The Pakistan ISI began funding the Taliban in the hopes of having another war, and that would be the fight for control of Lahore and Kashmir against the Indian government. So what in essence, what the Pakistanis didn't want was for the communists to take over Afghanistan with the help of the Indian government, to defeat Pakistan, because they saw Afghanistan as being a wasteland of communism, atheism, polytheism. So they funded the Taliban, and the Taliban took over with Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and others, and there was a big civil war. Now, the amount of people that were killed in this civil war trumped the 10-year war under the Soviet occupation in Afghanistan, and other such leaders like Daoud and others that, slaughtered these Afghanis, which led to the war in the first place. Massoud then began a 5-year war with the Taliban, with Hekmatyar, and later on, this led to the rise of another individual who was brought back from North Africa, and that was none other than Osama bin Laden, along with the Egyptians and others from an Arab base called al-Masada, which later became al-Qaeda. And now you have this group that is basically rebuilding Afghanistan with the Taliban's protection. Massoud's trying to fight against the Taliban, against Hekmatyar, and now he has Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda to fight against as well. So Massoud, who's one of the greatest guerrilla leaders of the 20th century, and was compared to leaders like Che Guevara and Ho Chi Minh. And the problem was that Massoud and Hekmatyar and Omar and Mullah Omar in the crossfire, tens of thousands of Afghans were being killed, not to mention the others that were killed in the wars between the Afghan leaders. And this led to a very bloody battle in which the United States stood back and watched. And so the Muslim world saw this, and they grew resentment toward the West. Look what you did. You left us with nothing, and now there's bloodshed again without you helping us. They just after the war, you used us, then you left us. And al-Qaeda remembered this. Osama bin Laden saw this and used that in propaganda videos in the mid-90s. Now, Leo, you studied Massoud very intently over the years, and from here, Massoud was having a problem of his own, and he didn't see it coming, did he?
No, he did not. And as you say, it's important to remember that the reason why Al Qaeda was targeting this guy is that he was a very important leader, because he was, as you said, a leader of the Northern Alliance. He was somebody who fought against Russia, and also someone who opposed the Taliban. So he was a very strong person. And since we like also to quote our sources because people say that in our show we break things down without them having to read the tons of books. If you want the details of this, you can read the CIA Wars by Steve Cole, which explains why Ahmad Shah Massoud was considered so highly by the CIA and by MI6. He was a recognized leader. He was a very powerful person. And also, I interviewed twice former DIA agent Julie Sears, who told me that he was also a very nice person as well. So that, of course, it does no harm having to do with somebody who's also nice to talk to. So what happened is that, interesting enough, Ahmad Shah Massoud was killed 2 days before 9/11. That's no accident. We'll get to it. And it was killed by two men who were Al Qaeda members. So these two people who were from Tunisia were posing as Belgian journalists with Moroccan origins. So, of course, they were speaking Arabic. That's why they had to also think of this kind of these guys, pretending that they were Moroccan. So we have these two guys whose names are very difficult for me to remember. So I did write them down. One of them was called Al Sattar, and the other one is also quite difficult to pronounce. I think it's something along the lines of El Owar or something like that. So these guys had a plan to kill Ahmad Shah Massoud. And they entered Afghanistan 2 weeks prior, so we can say 2 weeks before 9/11, since this happened just 2 days before, from the north. And Ahmad Shah Massoud was living, of course, in the north, close to the border with Tajikistan, because, of course, the central part of the nation was controlled by the Taliban. So these two people, disguised as journalists, said that they wanted to interview him for a newspaper called Arabic News International. The name is very vague, and indeed, this newspaper did not exist at all. This was something totally made up that they created for themselves, just to justify the fact that they wanted to talk to him. And let's keep in mind that this was pre-internet, or at least internet did exist, but it was not as widespread as it is today. So, and specifically in Afghanistan as such, those poor areas. Therefore, it would have been very difficult for these people to check if this newspaper actually existed. And I'm also sure that something called Arabic News International, of course, existed because the name was very vague. So, and also to make themselves more believable, they did other interviews, and they did interview in the day before two people that you mentioned, the former President Rabbani, and also the other Northern Alliance leader, Abdal Rasul Sayyaf. I always struggle with Arabic names because they all, they all look similar. They all sound similar
They do.
to us. And so they planned this assassination in the details, but they also got the approval to talk to Ahmad Shah Massoud the day before. That was September 8th. Do you want to add anything? Should I just go on with telling what
Oh, just keep
happened, who was
going.
present?
Yeah,
Okay,
keep going.
okay. So of course they did meet with Ahmad Shah Massoud, and they were not alone. So in this case, it's important that we remember who was there. We have the two terrorists, then we have, of course, Ahmad Shah Massoud, and we have three other people who are very important in the story. There's another journalist who back then was very young by the name of Mohammed Fahim Dasti, and he has a role in this story
Yes.
also because being a survivor, he told the story, and is probably the main source about what happened because he was an eyewitness, a survivor of this assassination. So he knows what happened. He's the best source that we have. Then we have the Afghan ambassador in India, Masood Khalili, who was also present, and another person belonging to the Northern Alliance by the name of Mohammed Asim Swahil.
Yes.
So And Dusty, as I said, is the most important person here. And he had met with these two guys also before. He was with them in the days before. And he said that they were totally nice and normal people. And this tells a lot because we also think that terrorists have to be, harsh and very hard and difficult people to live with. But of course, they have to disguise themselves and to blend in the society. Otherwise, they would stand out. Therefore,
Hmm.
they can be nice when it's needed. So I think that again, since we like to mention the sources, there's a very interesting documentary, a Dutch documentary called "Who Killed Massoud," and it can be found easily on YouTube or wherever you guys like to watch your videos. And if you just Google it, it will show up. It contains interviews with eyewitnesses, with people involved, and it also shows where this happened, the house close to the border with Tajikistan, where Ahmad Shah Massoud was killed. So what happened is that when they were talking, the fake cameraman detonated explosive devices in the camera and in the backup batteries that he had on himself. So
That's
what
right.
happened is that we have a suicidal attack in this case because the guy killed himself as well. So of course we have one of the terrorists who's dead. The other one escapes, but he is shot by the guards who were working for Ahmad Shah Massoud. Therefore, both the attackers are dead right away. And then we also have uh, Dusty was just injured, and Ahmad Shah Massoud was seriously injured, but not killed right away. So the difference is that Dusty could still talk, walk, and function while Ahmad Shah Massoud was seriously injured and he had to be taken to the office. So what happens is that they rush to an helicopter to fly to an hospital in Tajikistan, but Ahmad Shah Massoud dies during the flight. What's interesting here is that the Northern Alliance didn't say right away that he was killed. So if you check
Right.
the New York Times on September 10, Ahmad Shah Massoud was already dead because he was killed the day before. But the New York Times reported Ahmad Shah Massoud was seriously injured in a terrorist attack in Afghanistan, but he is still alive. Actually, he was dead, but they didn't say so. So that's
Yeah.
the story of the assassination in a nutshell.
Yeah. You know what? There was a let's go back to that a little bit, right? Because I wanted to touch on two things that you brought up. Um, It is alleged that the reason why the Al Qaeda was behind the assassination of Massoud was so that Al Qaeda wouldn't take the, or Bin Laden wouldn't take the brunt of what was coming, which was the September 11th operation, which was unknown to the Taliban. And they knew that the Taliban wanted to take over the country. In order to do that, they needed to kill Massoud, and they did that for him. That was alleged, by the way. You also brought up Julie Sears. Now, I interviewed Julie Sears only because you were the reason why, because I said, wow, Julie Sears is somebody I knew during my studies into 9/11 in the early days. And I want to talk about the story about Julie Sears because I think it's a turning point for the Afghan civil war and why Massoud was basically left hung to dry. And that was because Julie Sears, who, as you said, was a military analyst for the DIA, she actually made a trip that was not known to the DIA to Afghanistan in October or the fall, or so, I think it was the fall of 1997, November and October, and that she went and talked with Ahmad Shah Massoud, and she was made aware that there were training camps in Taliban-controlled territory, and these were Al Qaeda camps and camps that were not affiliated with Al Qaeda. And according to her, if I can remember correctly, the regime under the Taliban was being kept in power because of narcotics and bin Laden's money. So that there was little resistance coming from Massoud because he was not backed by much of anybody besides Rashid Datsam and the Tajiks. And with the little aid to, the Afghan resistance against the Taliban, they could have probably pushed the Taliban out of power if the CIA fully got involved. But there was a split in the CIA between getting involved with Massoud and some just not wanting anything to do with Afghanistan. Boy, that sounds familiar to today, doesn't it? But there was really great reluctance under the Clinton administration to get involved with Afghanistan again. And she actually, when I interviewed her, she blamed uh, the U.S. government and the State Department, and because she said that the State Department was interested in a company called Unical, which was trying to make a deal with the Taliban about achieving political stability to run a a trans Afghan pipeline. And she claimed that Massoud had proof that the Unical was providing money to the Taliban. And it was a great documentary. And damn, I can't remember it. But you talk about sources. I want to bring up a book called In the Graveyard of Empires, which is Afghanistan's war in Afghanistan. It was written by uh, Seth Jones. And there's another book called the Arabs at War by Mustafa Hamid, which I'm doing a chapter reading. Excellent book, where it basically talks about the State Department not wanting to have anything to do with the Afghan resistance, even politically, or revealed that there was any viable option to the Taliban because they want the Taliban to run a program with the Unical to run that pipeline. And she came back to the DIA and she brought back a whole bunch of troves of maps, training camps, photographs, interviews with people. And she said that by when Massoud captured Al Qaeda operatives, she learned that there was an airline in Afghanistan. It was being used by bin Laden called Ariana Airlines. And it was being used to ferry drugs and weapons to Pakistan. And she learned that bin Laden goes hunting with rich Saudis and top Taliban officials. And this was where that idea, Leo, you're familiar with, that Richard Clark and the CIA were having, at odds about drone striking these Yemenis that were involved with Saudi Arabia and bin Laden, falcon hunting or whatever. But she got in trouble, sir. She got in trouble by the DIA. She was suspended, and her material was confiscated, and she was being accused as a spy by even her own colleagues. And so I thought that without the CIA's help, without the State Department help, Massoud was left out to dry, and he gets killed. And you brought that up in detail, and this is the reason why the Taliban was so successful in those, and look what happened. Taliban took over the country, right? Al Qaeda and the Taliban took over the country, and there was a 20-year war that ended in 2021. Well, guess what happened? Taliban took over the country again. And, I'll throw back the question to you, Leo. We talked about how the past affects the future to understand the future and the present to go back to the past. Let me throw this question to you, Leo. The Taliban now is the de facto government of Afghanistan. And guess what? Through the little intelligence that we do have, there are now 12 training camps attributed to Al Qaeda operating in Afghanistan. Are we ever going to see another terrorist attack in this country? And do we go back to war against a country that is far more formidable than when the Taliban and Al Qaeda ever existed in the 90s? I'll let you answer that pretty, impossible question.
Well, I think that comparing the past with the current situation is always a bit odd because things change. So, of course, I think that the level of security and the level of awareness is much higher these days than in the 90s. So, I understand your question. I think that it was, well, actually, I don't want to play the Monday morning quarterback here, but of course, it was a terrible mistake to go out of Afghanistan because the Taliban are back in power. And at the very beginning, they also said, oh, we're not as bad as we used to be. And now no one even remembers that they said that because, of course, that's not true. Of course, that's not true. So no one even remembers that. So I think that we might have Al Qaeda regrouping. That I see that coming. That has happened already. But I think that the level of security in the United States is much higher these days. And I also think that leaders are important. And it's not easy to replace a leader such as Osama bin Laden because none of the other Al Qaeda leaders proved as, let me say, charismatic. Of course, I'm talking about an evil person here. I'm not saying that as we would talk about, leaders or political figures in the West. But nobody else has that ability to convince people and to bring them together. So I'm not sure we'll see Al Qaeda planning something like that again. And I think that it's also worth mentioning that not only the investigation after the assassination of Ahmad Shah Massoud identified Al Qaeda as, I mean, identified the two killers as being Al Qaeda members. And there's also a cable by the CIA that was disclosed due to a request, Freedom of Information Act request, that said that those two people were actually Al Qaeda members. But Al Qaeda actually admitted doing that assassination, I should say, in their own online magazine, which for which the English title is Voice of Jihad. I have no clue what it's called in Arabic. And we can easily understand why they did that, because, of course, I think that they had two goals. First off, Osama bin Laden knew that after 9/11, the US would have invaded Afghanistan, or at least attacked Afghanistan, and he needed to weaken the resistance of the Northern Alliance. And it all goes back to how important leaders are. He needed to kill their leaders so that they would have been much weaker without someone actually coordinating and motivating people. And the other thing that we should think of is that Osama bin Laden wanted to have the favor of the government, because actually the Taliban were governing the country, and whoever says otherwise, like that relationship was reversed, it's not, doesn't get their facts right. So he needed their protection. Therefore, he needed to do a favor to the government so that they would have to do a favor back to him. And so by weakening the resistance, he also needed to, gain the favor of the Taliban by killing their most important enemy. That happened 2 days before 9/11. So I think that this is often overlooked, but we should consider more that this was an important link of the chain of the events leading to 9/11, because it's so connected, it's so close in time, but it's also very connected.
Yeah, and this is a great point that you raised too. And also let's talk about the malfeasance that was involved in this. I mean, especially in the years 2000, right? Near 2000, the early months of 2001. There were many times, Leo, where the CIA had drawn up plans. And I remember in my later years of study, there was a big discussion between the Clinton administration and the Bush administration. There was a clash of what was important. For the Clinton administration, they had Richard Clarke, for example, the counterterrorism czar, under both Clinton Bush administrations, where he would be given briefs to the Principals Committee, which was the leaders of the Intelligence and Department of Defense, Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, leaders of the FBI director, CIA director, DI director, and they will all be sitting at this table talking about what are the threats to national security. In December 2000 or January 2001, the CIA's Counterterrorism Center actually developed a plan, which was actually, and not many people know about this, but it's called the Blue Sky Memo. And it recommended support to anti-Taliban groups. One of them was Massoud, right? So to talk about the split between the CIA and the State Department was that they would give full-on support to anti-Taliban groups, and the Clinton administration approved of this, and they wanted a major attack from the Northern Alliance to the Taliban to tie down Al Qaeda's personnel before, to decimate the group. But nobody followed up on a memo. No actions taken, and the Clinton administration is gone. Right, so the Bush administration comes in. The CIA under Director Tenet and the Director of Operations James Pavitt, they pressed the idea to the Bush administration, who has no interest in it, because to them, who leads the top of the principals meetings? No longer it's Clarke. He's out in the back seat. They get rid of the Clinton administration officials, but they kept Clarke, right? Because he was too important to let go. But they put China and North Korea as the number one threats to national security. And so the National Security Council Terrorism Staff under Richard Clarke proposed a new strategy paper. And this one talks about the urgency to defeat Al Qaeda and the Taliban, and then he asks the National Security Advisor, the Bush National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, to propose a new plan to defeat the Taliban and Al Qaeda, and they didn't take up on it. Like, he never got to those. He never proposed this paper because he never got the chance to. And so, again, it goes back to the point where Either, it's I don't think this is a deliberate, they wanted the Taliban to take over, but my goodness, the amount of malfeasance that, and it's easy because it's Tom Chair quarterback, like you said, but my God, if they thought that China and North Korea were going to be a threat and ignored the problem in Afghanistan, and until a terrorist attack took place, you ignored all the intelligence warnings, you ignored all the warnings from foreign intelligence and the enemies that were fighting against them, and you had to basically ignore this on purpose because your priorities were, oh, there's a new enemy, and it's socialism, communism, and totalitarianism from a faraway country that has never caused a terrorist attack inside the United States. So it's like, my goodness, we're seeing the same problems again currently today. And it just blows my mind that, during those years of 2000, 2001, the early, before 9/11, we could have had a chance to destroy Al Qaeda and we didn't.
Yeah, but I also think that what happened 4 years ago with the withdrawal from Afghanistan is very complex, is everything that we
Mm,
mentioned here, because the
sure.
Doha agreements were very poorly done.
Yes.
And let's not forget that the withdrawal from Afghanistan happened during the Biden administration, but the Doha agreements were done by incumbent President Donald Trump,
Right.
who reached an agreement with Taliban without involving the Afghan government. Okay, we have to underline this. I want to always keep my discussion as apolitical as possible. On my channel, you have people from the right and people from the left, but hard facts are
Yes.
hard facts. Okay, and
Right.
someone once told me hard facts have no political color, and that's correct. Okay, so
Correct.
the fact that there was an agreement between American the Taliban without the Afghan government was done by President Trump. So in 2021, President Biden had two choices. I either withdraw from Afghanistan, making the mess that we're all seeing, or I restart the war. Okay, that has to be specified very clearly. So what were the options? Both options were wrong. Okay, this is one of the cases in which you're damned if you do it and you're damned if you don't. So
Correct.
that was a very complex situation that probably should have been blamed on the previous president, who's the incumbent one, who's a guy by the name of Donald Trump. And having said that, Afghanistan is also a very complex country because we, from afar, think of Afghanistan or any other country in the world as we say, something that has a central government, people belonging to the nation, speaking the same language, and blah, blah, blah. Afghanistan is not like that. It's a group of tribes. Okay, I spoke to many people who were there and people who don't know each other, who confirmed that in Afghanistan they speak different languages. They are very loyal to their local warlords, and they're not committed to their central government, not even a shred. Therefore, of course, there was no, rush to keep the government as it was, because people don't feel like they belong to a central to a central controlled state. And we also have to keep in mind that that's a very poor country and also a very corrupt one. So
Very.
Afghanistan is usually much more complex than we can think of. So again, I don't want to play the Monday morning quarterback here, but we have to keep in mind all these different aspects when we talk about Afghanistan.
True enough, indeed. So, Leo, tell me, what projects are you working on currently, and what do we expect from you in the upcoming days and weeks?
Okay, so I know that probably this is not the first time I say so, but I'm still working about the Saudi involvement because I'm working with the Florida Bulldog to set a few points straight about their most recent articles. I might have them on the show for the
Awesome.
second time. I still have to coordinate things with them, so that's what I have in mind. And I also have to publish the story of one of the responders, because I'm in touch with this former policeman from New Jersey who was very good at talking. So I'll probably have him on the channel again or make something written with him. Still have to decide, but I'm studying his story right now to prepare to interview him again, because I had that guy on the channel a few weeks ago to talk about the murder of that Ukrainian girl in Charlotte last month. No, 2 months ago. It was August, and he's also 9/11 responder. So I'll have him again.
All right, awesome. Yeah, listen, Florida Bulldog is, magnificent. They're the best in the country when it comes to updates regarding 9/11 and Saudi involvement. And I owe them a debt of gratitude. I've interviewed Dan Christensen, and I think I'm going to have Robin Swan on one day in this year, actually. So I'm going to talk with her. And yeah, I think that's about it to wrap it up. Leo, I'll have all of Leo's contact information in the description. And listen, guys, thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode next month.
See you next time. Bye bye.